Hi, I'm Bob Shockey, and I'm here to tell you all about MegaToDo nuts and bolts under the hood. So, there's already a video that shows you how to use MegaToDo, and you should have watched that first before you get into this, or else some of this might look a little confusing. But I'm going to try to move fairly quickly here and cover as much ground as I can because actually packed into this little tiny template are a lot of pretty interesting features. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit this start button. And right now, I am logged in just as an administrator, okay? And what that means is I'm seeing everybody's to-dos. They're not specific to me. You may notice that there's not a name up here. That's because I logged in as an administrator. I'm not really supposed to be a regular user in this system. But what it does do is it gives me the ability to look under the hood. And I'm going to start by showing you the tables that are in here. So Shift D, and you can see that there are 4 tables in here. Not a lot. This main table is mostly full of global fields. Notice that it has 51 records in it. That's going to be important later. Not the number 51, but just the fact that it has a whole lot of records in it right out of the gate. And it's like that when you download MegaToDo. It's got that many records in it. And I'll explain that to you in a few minutes. There's a list items table. So this main table, it's just global fields, and it's just meant for allowing you to see the records that you need to see when the filters get set. All of the filters are set in global fields, and that's what displays the right records in the portal that we see on that main screen. So, list items, these are the actual to-dos. This one here is personnel. These are all the people using the system. You get to assign a username and a password and some initials and a full spelled out name and a few other parameters to each user who logs in and uses the system. This is something you get to handle as an administrator, and you saw that in the previous video. And then this settings table really barely has anything in it. It's literally got one record in it, and it's just whether or not a person is able to create login accounts. So I'm going to go back to the main table here, and you can see these are all globals except for that one parameter that we just set. And then there are the list items. There's really just a few fields that are all about actually seeing, actual information about the to-do item. Everything else is either a calculated field that's designed to show you something from another table, like all of these here, or this one that calculates how far out the due date is from the current date in days. And then there's this sort record or sort field, which is actually used to tell that particular to-do item how to sort itself along with all the other to-do items. And I'll be going over that just a little bit later. And then everything else down here is a bunch of global fields that are used for storing data that we use various times throughout the process. Then these last few are key fields, including the primary key for this table, which is this to-do ID field. Okay, and then relationship-wise is very, very simple. It's a very simple anchor buoy. This first table here and relationship is used for when a person first logs in, they put in their login name as part of logging into the system, and then it matches that login name to their personnel record, and then it grabs their ID from that personnel record, their actual primary key, and then from there it uses that primary key from that point forward. So that relationship is literally only used on login. Then this personnel created is just simply to match up people to a particular to-do item when it's being created. In this case, it's going to be however you're logged in. It's always going to grab all that information about who created it, and it's going to spell out their full name, first and last. It's going to spell out, or it's going to put their initials in there, all capitals, that sort of thing. And then this list items portal, this is exactly how all of those filters are used. to show what's in the portal. And the way that's done, actually what it's doing is it's using the criteria for the filters that you've set. It does a find in a utility window, grabs that set of IDs, stuffs them into a global field, and then it matches on those to the portal. Technique that I use very commonly. And I find that it's very fast, and it's actually, I find it easier to do things with a script than to build complex relationships to try to match all of those different filters. It's much easier to just go through and do it programmatically. And then these two are simply Cartesian joins, one of them to show all the personnel in the personnel table and to show all the settings in the settings table. We'll get into that a little bit later. Then this one, list items. So these are, once again, they're your to-do items, and this is how it does things like look up the name of somebody who you've delegated information to, how it displays information about the person who created that to-do, and how it displays information about the person who that to-do has been delegated to. And then a Cartesian join once again to the settings table, which, as I said, contains exactly one parameter. So now what I want to do is, before I get into some of the scripting in this, I really want to show you a little bit about how things work on the layout, because otherwise you're probably going to be a little confused about some of this stuff. It's not really obvious, and I want to make it easy on you. So here we go. This is a button bar, and it shows the priority. Let me go back to browse mode for a second. That priority right there. These buttons right here are represented by this button bar, which is right here. And then this button bar right here is for these buttons here. Now you may notice something, you may have been noticing a theme here. The button bar is only as wide as the buttons that it's showing, and the buttons have all been made very skinny in order to all fit into the button bar, which is they resize automatically. The reason is that all of these button bars are designed to only show one button at a time. What that means is, if we look at, right here, if we look at this button bar right here, and then we look at one particular button, this is the one that shows time of day. And basically what it's saying is, if the time of day field is not AM, don't show it. And the next one over will be easier if I just double clicked on it so I can jump around. So this one now, if I look at this, it's going to say PM. So don't show it if it's not PM, etc. So since there can only be one value in that field, the way things are set up, it's only going to show one at a time. But the button bar has to be wide enough to show only one button at a time, or else it looks really weird. And I'm going to show you that with this one over here. Now this one, this particular button bar, I've got it set to be 21 wide and 21 high in points. And that's the size of an individual button. Now if I take 21 and I multiply it by 5, because there are 5 different priorities, 5 different buttons in this button bar, if I multiply 21 times 5, I get 105. So I'm just going to change the width of this to 105. And suddenly it's going to make a lot more sense to you. Now you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 5 is hidden under that little flag right there. And which is, it would be nice if we could just see them this way all the time when we go into layout mode, wouldn't it? Because they'd be easier to work with. You can click on them easily and so forth. But look what happens when I go into browse mode. That doesn't look right. Okay, and that's because the button bar is always the size of the button bar, however you specified it, and the buttons have to adjust to whatever the button bar size is. So I'm doing it in reverse. I'm adjusting the size of the button bar to accommodate the buttons to be correct. So I'm going to take this back down to 21. And now it will display correctly. And that's true of all of these. So they all look kind of weird on here. When you first look at them. When you do go to work with them, I strongly suggest that you just do the math and expand them out to their full size so that you can click on all the buttons. Otherwise, it's really aggravating trying to click on all these different little buttons and know whether or not you've got the right one. It helps a lot that they are all named over here in the object palette, but nevertheless, it's still a little better to expand the button bar to make it easier to work with. There are 3 button bars that are like this. There's one for priority, there's the one for status, and there's the one for time of day. Now, when I click on one of these buttons, in some of these cases, when I click on one of these buttons, what I get is I get a nice little popover. It happens when I choose a time of day. It happens when I choose a status. It does not happen when I choose a priority because it just cycles through those buttons to find the one that, to find the next one in line. But when I'm doing these, I get these nice little popovers. Now, originally, what I thought I was going to do was put a popover on every one of these buttons. Now, why didn't I do that? Because somebody pointed out to me that I was an idiot and I was doing it the wrong way, and I actually needed to do it differently. So instead, what I do is run a script which goes to a hidden button underneath the one that I am selecting. And originally I was concerned that maybe this might not work in WebDirect because WebDirect doesn't like you to stack things, but actually it does work in WebDirect because you're not selecting a field that's under another object, you're just selecting a button, and buttons will still activate even if they're hidden under other buttons. So if I move this button bar right here, there's actually another little button with no attributes at all. It doesn't have any fill or line or outer shadow or color, anything. But it actually is the popover button. That way I'm able to get away with having only one popover for all of these buttons, and all I do is let it know which button got clicked. I'm just going to hit Command Z. The multiple levels of undo thing in FileMaker is just great. I'm so glad they added that feature because it allows us to just undo, 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 and get back to where we were, especially for doing a demo like this. It's great. Okay. So now I'm going to go into the scripts a little bit. I want to show you how some of these scripts work. None of this stuff is rocket science. None of these scripts is very complicated, and neither are the calculation fields. I'm going to show you actually some of the most complicated stuff in the system, and it won't take you long to understand it. And if it does take a little while, come back, watch this video again, rewind it, and take some notes. Because some of these concepts some of this is a little bit advanced. If you're a relatively new developer, you might trip over some of this stuff a couple times, but you'll get it. It's really not that hard. And by the way, that thing I just told you about doing it the wrong way and calling myself a dummy, you know what? You'll keep making mistakes. I've been doing this for 25 years, writing FileMaker databases. I still don't think things through sometimes and make dumb mistakes and have to go back and redo my work. It's just part and parcel of doing this kind of thing. All right. So now let's take a look at some of these scripts. Now they're all organized into folders. We got all of our things that happen when we start up. Taking us through a basic startup routine where it sets a whole bunch of variables and global fields and things like that with the username and today's date and person's initials for the account that they logged in with, their full name, all that kind of stuff all gets set in easily accessible global fields we can get to anywhere. And then if the person's never logged in before, you might have seen from the previous video I did, which I mentioned you should have watched that before you got into this one. It takes them straight to a screen to create their first new user, and that's what this part's about. So even the startup script is not that hard. The skip button, it's got 3 lines in it. There's just a few simple navigation things, and creating a new user account. This uses some of the account setup features in FileMaker. And then this filters folder is just for setting all of these different filters. If you want to set a status filter, it's just looking at what your current choice is and moving it to the next one. It's really simple. Same thing with priority. It's just setting the priority to whatever you set it to in the filters. This is just for filters. The actual to-do item, there's a new to-do card, and then there's an add to-do card. This really should say card. Maybe I'll fix that. But the idea is that there are two different layouts that you can go to. One of them, you create a new to-do, and it's all done with globals. These are all global fields that get set. And then when you are editing an existing to-do, then it actually opens that to-do record. So there are two cards that look exactly the same. I'll show them to you. Actually, I'll show them to you right now. So I'm just going to create a new window. And I am going to show my status bar. I'm going to go to that card window. Here's the add new card. And there it is. This card pops up when you add a new to-do item. And you'll notice that these are all global fields. You can tell because they all begin with a Z and have a G in the name. Even this one that's actually a key field, they all have G's in them. Okay, and all these buttons that set various global fields, they're all globals as well. When I click add this item, it actually passes along all of those script parameters, it doesn't even pass along script parameters. It just takes those global contents, sets them into fields on a new to-do record, and that to-do gets created. So real simple. Now going back here, and then when I want to delete a to-do, there's a delete button. Very simple. Doesn't do a whole lot. Confirmation, and then determining the context and deleting the record. So where am I when I delete it? But there's one down here a little later that I really want to make sure I get to. Person management. This is all about adding people, deleting people, changing their password. All very straightforward. Searching and sorting is a little bit more complicated. There's an old sort technique. Actually, it's not that complicated, but all it does is tell a calculation field how to sort everything, and then it concatenates a bunch of values together in that field and sorts by that field. So that portal is always sorted by that calculation field, but it changes when you click the various headers. So when I'm here and I'm looking at this portal and I go to sort these tasks, if I sort by due date, well, it already is sorted by due date because you can see it put the oldest one first. But if I sort by time of day, then it should, it's going to sort. Okay, so let's take this one and move it up to today. And now when I click time of day, it's going to sort it differently. The reason is that in that script, what it actually does, or in the calculation field, excuse me, what it actually does is it sorts by several different columns. It doesn't just sort by one, because that wouldn't make any sense. You still might want it sorted by, stuff from previous days before things that get into today in the morning. You want to see what you were going to do in the afternoon yesterday and didn't get done, right? So that's why it's set up that way. And you can change that. It can all be changed. That calculation field is actually, let's go here. Let's see where I want to be. Be in list items and ZC sort. This is it right here. This is a very old technique. You may have seen this before. If you have, just skip over it. You know how it works. If you haven't seen it, all I'm doing is I'm setting up a variable for time of day field, the status field. I'm looking at that sort field to see how it wants me to sort. And then I'm setting up, I'm looking at it I'm numbering my times of day. So AM comes first, then PM comes second, end of business comes third, end of day comes fourth, ongoing goes last. Same thing with our statuses. I want pending to be number 1 and progress to be number 2. You could resort these so that they show up differently just based on changing these numbers. It's really easy. And then all I'm doing is I'm just saying if I'm sorting by priority, then I want to concatenate the due date and the priority and the status. And if I am sorting by status, then I want status to be the first thing I sort by, concatenated with the due date as a number, and so on. And that way it sorts things according to this complicated little set of concatenations I've done here. You could rearrange these any way you want and it'll work fine. Okay, so enough about that. Now what I want to get into is that I'm going to show you some things that I think are pretty easy to use. They're really easy to use. One thing is this Boolean flag. This script is used all over the place. Everywhere that I have these buttons that are set a Boolean on or off, like this ongoing button or this personal button, and various other ones like this little switch right here that switches on and off. All of those are Booleans, right? They're either a 1 or a 0, or a 1 or nothing. And all it does is you pass it a field name, and the script just grabs that field name, and then it sets field by name according to what it finds in that field. So if that field has a 0 in it, it's going to put a 1. If it has a 1, it's going to put a 0, and sets that Boolean on and off. And you can use it all over the place throughout this solution. So if you decided you wanted to add another Boolean to these to-dos, maybe you wanted to add one for I don't know, whether or not it's something that you have to go out of the office for, an errand that you have to go out of the office for, and you want to lump all of those together, and you added an icon for that, and you set a Boolean for whether or not that's true, then you could just use that script by passing that field name to it, and it's going to work. Okay, now, next, we're going to talk a little bit about just the kind of the way this whole thing works. You got all these different filters here. You know that when you set these, all it's doing is it's setting one of those values into a list, and it's adding these values to a return separated list. It's then using that return separated list as a set of new find requests to search through and narrow down our found set. It's about as simple as it gets. Really straightforward logic. It's all commented pretty well, so you should take to it pretty quickly. And then one last thing that I want to go over is the way we avoid record locking with this global table. Like I said, this is just a global table. Remember I said that there's that one table that has a whole set of records in it. There's 51 records in it. Don't ask me how I ended up at 51. It's silly, but nevertheless, I did end up there, and this is it right here. So what happens if you have a bunch of users trying to use the same single record in a global table? Like say you have, a lot of times you'll have a global table and you'll just put one record in it, right? Why do you need any more records? Well, here's why. Because if you have multiple users hitting that one record and they're all trying to edit this portal at the same time, guess what? First one to get there locks everybody else out from editing that portal. And then suddenly they can't do any of this nice inline editing that we're able to do in here. They could still open up the detail view and edit it here, because then they're on an individual different record. But that is not the case if they're trying to edit in the portal. And so the way this works is in this personnel table, you notice everybody gets a number. And this is an auto-enter serial number for each user, and you do not want to have any duplication there at all. You got to be very careful about that, because the whole idea is that each user, when they log in as part of that startup script, it goes to their number record. So Stassi Schroeder right here goes to record number 1 in that global table, and she's always in record number 1. Katie Maloney goes to record number 2, etc. And so they never lock each other out of that portal that way. It's an old technique, once again, but it works very well. I haven't really ever found a better way to do it. That is about it for how MegaToDo works. You can reach me at bob@alchemyg.com. That's ALCHEMYG.com. If you have any questions about MegaToDo, feature requests, if you just want to tell me if you like it, if you want to tell me if you don't like it, whatever you want, send me an email, and I'll fill you in on anything you need to know about it. And that's about it. Enjoy. It's totally free. You know where to download it. You know where to find me. Have a good one.